Observation 1 is the resolution analysis. The number 1 is the resolution. The Republic of Colombia should offer amnesty to the members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Observation 2 is going to be the framework. The number 1 is our interpretation. Is the judge is an intellectual critic who should evaluate this debate as a matter of competing ethics. The judge is an intellectual critic who should evaluate this debate as a matter of competing ethics. The number 2 point is role playing as the government trains us to view the world through hierarchies. A few indications of this. The first is that the policy making is controlled by the special interest elite. This was proven by a Harvard and Yale study that found that 90% of the bills passed through the legislature only benefit the top 10%, making us effectively an oligarchy, which means that all things passed through the legislature are only propagating the privilege in society and always delegitimizing, dehumanizing those who aren't in those certain spaces. Also, this means that the privileged elite who control the legislature categorize humans as subhumans, non-humans, and full humans, and those categories justify atrocities and genocide for the sake of utilitarian logic, which is what they use, which means that that direct confrontation against the colonialized body is the only key step, is the only way we can actually have access to liberty. The third point is going to be that the debate space endorses a matter of ethics that endorses absolutism. This is found by the fact that we are trained to think that through a sweeping pen in the legislature, through the sweeping pen of the legislature and through the judge's ballot, we can solve systemic crises going around the world. But this separates us from the dailiness and our personal influence that we have with our interactions and orientations to the world and the violence that we carry through our representations. The fourth point, therefore, is that the representations in the debate space have real implications in the way we look at the world when we leave the debate room. It has the most magnitudinal impact because that education goes past any impacts that last within the 45 minutes of the debate space, which means, therefore, the fifth point is that fiat is illusory and that it has no tangible implications that can exist in or outside its debate space, meaning that the representations and the rhetoric we use or the methods that we use that carry those representations are the only impacts that actually matter in the debate space. The next observation is going to be the background. The number one is that the many things such as the economy and the Colombia and the war and the U.S. war on drugs cause the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia to have their genesis. They come from a very Marxist ideology, but this became quickly violent because they started using terrorist tactics. This terrorist organization started selling children as sex slaves as certain ways to gain profits on the market, and the current negotiations that the FARC is having with Colombia would make these rape indictments and the rape and mutilation and sex slave that they've been carrying in for profits not punished, and they would be giving amnesty and they wouldn't even be going to prison. The President Juan Manuel Santos said it was, quote unquote, the justice that will result from the process will not be a perfect justice, no, but it will be an honest justice. That is the quote that has happened from the negotiations that has happened in the status quo. Also with the 30,000 fighters that have given their armed weapons into Colombia, 90% have received amnesty and no indictments, and they have gotten to no court cases for the rape and the sex slave that they committed in their time when they were in the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. We say that this is an instance of colonializing the body. Also, it is a perfect parallel to what happened with the women in the Gulabi gang in northern India and the women of the Red Brigade, where they were given no access to the police forces. The police forces literally just ignored them. The legislators literally just ignored them, saying, well, we would just have to change the India constitution for you to get any solvency to the fact that your body was colonialized and raped and mutilated by these people in your community. So they had to take a direct confrontation because our colonialized body was actually never represented or given any solvency. Therefore, the implications, number one, is that dehumanization and genocide always becomes cyclical in a world where we endorse these ethics within the debate space, because this means that we are endorsing categorizing humans as subhumans and non-humans when we propagate these ethics through resolution and through policy making. That means that the genocide and war always become inevitable because we'll always be categorizing humans as the other, which means that violence is always justified. Therefore, the plan text. The Republic of Colombia should offer amnesty to members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. The Republic of Colombia should offer amnesty to the members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Solvency number one is that the direct confrontation is absolutely key. A few indications of this. Gulabi gang within northern India, Gulabi is Hindi for the word pink, the pink gang. Why are they called the pink gang? Because they wear pink saris and they take bamboo sticks, and they will literally go into houses where women come to them and say, my husband is raping me, and the police forces aren't doing anything. Once they find out that the police forces and the law enforcement aren't doing anything against this, they will literally get a group of women from the Gulabi gang, take bamboo sticks, and beat the crap out of the men with a direct confrontation. The men therefore learn never to touch women again. This movement started in 2006 with just 5 members. In 2014, they now stand strong at 400,000 members. They have also created sub-movements within the Gulag gang. They started the Red Brigade, which is a peaceful organization that just teaches self-defense to women and defense against the colonialization and mutilation of their body, because the state and the policymaking always considers the subhuman, which means that their violence is always created within a structure where it's always just silence. The number 2 is that we saw, because the Aff forces direct physical confrontation with the language of the resolution that hierarchies humanity into subhumans and non-humans, i.e. how the FARC is getting full reparations for the fact that they committed the sex slave and the rape of all these women, yet we don't care because we consider those women and those children sub and non-humans. We directly confront that as the Gulag gang does with their method. The number 3 is that we are the first. This method is the first step to liberating the oppressed and colonialized body. It is a symbolic act of confronting the colonizer from the flesh. This is a proven method of giving liberty to the lowest caste system, to the women who are literally not even represented or protected by the police forces, let alone the legislature, and who never have a voice at the bilateral negotiations between these terrorist organizations and the legislature of say Colombia. It actually legitimizes us with the ethics that we are propagating, with the way that we are confronting the resolution. We are actually giving a voice, which is why the debate space is a unique space to bring in and defend those narratives, but also our own narratives and the ways our own body and our mind have been oppressed. We allow these narratives to enter the debate space, but by propagating the method of direct confrontation, because we say that the ethics of the normative South's debate never defend that.
So, last time?
Yeah.
Okay, so you say that you don't approve of the amnesty and that you don't like the resolution, but then your plain text is the resolution. How do you reconcile that?
So we are defending the fiated implications of the plain text, and we say that that is absolutely key for our method in particular, because you have to imagine it to be, which is the Greek etymology of fiat, we are imagining it to be the fiated implications, so that way we can actually have direct confrontation with the representations that it creates. We say that that methodological approach, you have to let it be in order for us to have direct confrontation. You have to know who the colonizer is, so we have to fiat it, so we know who exactly the colonizer is, i.e. the resolution and what it's forcing us to propagate through the ethics that are embedded in the resolution. So yes, we fiat it, so that way we can have direct confrontation with it. Cool, thanks.
Cool. All right. It is going to be one off.
Let's get it.
Yeah. Surprise.
Okay, so here's a question.
And then on case, in order. Keeping it simple. Yeah, because you know what you said it right? Alright. Is everybody ready? Yep, okay. First is the thesis that Western philosophical tradition values the illusion of pure and absolute presences over the possibility of absent, means that all meaning and value are attributed to the centers of truth, and that this is where we focus everything. These constructs always have to be visible, tangible, and normalized. They are perfect entities capable of absolute solutions and certainty. They force us to look at things in a perfected world. Most usually these centers are God, nation state, and most importantly the law. This creates an ultimate presence, and this ultimate presence is textual stability. The law becomes the logos that we look at to rationalize what we do and the actions. The text is the stability of presence, and it never allows us to have absence. The law doesn't exist unless it is written down and given unique value. The law doesn't exist outside of this, but it is codified within the state once you write it down and deal with that. Additionally, we in our philosophy, or in Western philosophy, we prioritize law and make it the center of truth. This leads to the exclusion of the periphery, because when we focus on one instance, then we avoid looking at things that are outside of the center, and we continue to push them out of our viewpoint. Going on to the links. What? Fiat is presented as the world that we assume immediate, tangible, and worthy. Okay. They use fiat to imagine here. They try to say that they're not using fiat, but when they present you a plain text, they are using fiat. They are not delineating how they are using imagination versus the other way. But additionally, even if they are using imagination, this only links harder because they are saying that we can create create this perfect world through our imagination to actually create this, which means that this creates the only mechanism to formalize the plain text, and it immediately privileges the present over the absence. They negate the fact that we can't have the absence of it. We have to have something going on. Before the debate starts, our norms tell us that we must establish a perfect world in which we live in, and they try to access this through the use of imagination. Going on to the second point, the plain text is the commodification of logos of the philosophical tradition. It does this in 3 different ways. The little a is that the plain text has the fewer words, but it holds the most important meaning in the round, and this is where we generate most of our offense. The little b is that this creates a grammatical hierarchy when we always look to the plain text, because everything has to center around it. It makes those words more important than other words. The little c is that this replicates laws in 2 ways. One, it is the law in the round that we look to, and the second way is that it is the law in the real world that we wish to implement, which just continues this replication. The third argument here is that the function of the plain text is to exclude. It is functionally deemed to exclude arguments. Additionally, their imagination spin on the plain text is deemed to exclude disadvantages that we could potentially run, or basically any other arguments, which means that they're always pushing things out to the periphery. The fourth argument here is that amnesty is an attempt to appease the periphery from the center. When they grant amnesty, they are trying to pacify the revolutionary forces, to try and get them to reconcile the differences with the government, which means that they continually silence the periphery from ever going back. The impacts. The first impact here is going to be of violence. Grammar of law captures the resolution and is posited in the center and exalted in the community. By creating the center, we exclude the periphery. This gives reasons for the violence against others. This is literally the reason why we feel justified in pushing against others. The little a is that this law justifies the military and the police to enact against the other person who isn't fitting within what they see as the normalized, decent thing to do. Additionally, the little b, we can see this in gender categories. When you don't fit specifically within the center, when you don't fit within what we have defined, then people do things like having an intersex child and giving them surgery right away to create a gender identification, which then leads to further problems down the road. This is the root of the violence that is occurring, and only perpetuates it. Going on to the alternative. The alternative is an action. Basically, erase the plain text by drawing a line through it to reject the grammatical hierarchy.
Place it under erasure.
And place it under erasure.
Repeat that.
It's an action, so you strike the plain text and you place it under erasure. It's rejecting the grammatical hierarchy. Okay. Alt solvency. 1. The destabilized grammar, which is a destabilization of the metaphysics of the presence. This means that the acts of the rapture over the acts of the government's rapture over overture are revolutionary, inquisitive, and it follows us to problematize that every perfection that we perceive through the plain text. We are linguistic rebels. The second here is that the empirics are on our side. Writers Derrida, Heidegger, and Sputnik have used erasure to expose the multiplicity of meaning that is excluded by the stable logos. This means that the criticism gives us more education by knowing the inherent problems of the stable language. The third argument here is that erasure is good. Little a is that erasure allows us to focus on the text outside of the text itself, as opposed to competing binaries of plain versus counter text. This avoids the hierarchy of implicit in the center and periphery relations that invert our perception of its perfection. The b is that the problem is not that we should favor presence over absence, but rather that we should have a balance between the two. This is what Derrida calls the trace, which is that you can neither have fully absence or fully presence, but rather a balance in between the two, because one without the other means that we are constantly in imbalance and we can't function properly in either one. The C is that we expose the playfulness. In the structures that are supposed to be rigid. We make them malleable. Through this, we open up new channels and new meanings by which education can flourish. The little d is that erasure presents a new existential ethic and a new way of being in the world. We no longer just accept things, but rather we are against. We no longer just accept things, but rather we are against the violence. We have created a new space that utilizes the ethic of the masses, which are everywhere. The little e is that this means our solvency is independent of a movement, because textual erasure already forces rethinking from its inception. This is very active rebellion against grammar alone breaks down the perfection of logos. Going on to the framework. One is that we don't think that fiat debate is fun, but this criticism is not post or pre-fiat, but it transcends fiat. Since fiat is only after the plain text, erasing the plain text epistemology as well, because epistemology is key to our perception. When we can interrogate our epistemology, it leads to interrogation of the impacts of that on our actions. Additionally, epistemological shortcomings is what creates bad policy, which then leads to the violence and the exclusion that we were talking about. Going on to their framework. First off, they say that this is going to be a competing ethics, but then they never actually give you an ethic, which means that there's really nothing to be weighing this on. So we would propose that you can look to the net benefits of the impacts of both of these, saying that neither are being excluded, but rather we can look at all of the arguments. Additionally, on the role-playing equals hierarchies, we would say that you can cross-apply the K here, or you can cross-apply erasure here, saying that the hierarchies are created in grammar because it is what we do. The logos is what generates this, which means that that is the root cause, and there is absolutely no reason why role-playing is creating the hierarchies. Additionally, Additionally, we don't think like the government's great. But going on to their case. On the background, you can extend across that they would be getting, the people of FARC would be getting away with all these crimes such as rape and all of this. You can extend that across as a straight impact, like as a straight link to the entirety of their case, because we would say that these are probably pretty bad things, that people should be held accountable for their actions, and that there is no reason why they should do this. Additionally, on solvency, they have absolutely no solvency because the military, or the government's at odds with the military, which means that they're never going to enforce this.
Yep.
So like, what does the world of your fault look like? People just like crossing out grammar every time I see it?
Okay, it's the destabilization of grammar, which allows us to think in different ways. Because when we don't necessarily think in the stable way of logos that we're used to, then it allows for us to come up with different ideas and not exclude what we don't see as normal.
Right, so what does the world of your all look like then?
It looks like a more inclusive world that is accepting of different ideologies.
How does the method of like crossing out words on a piece of paper create that world then?
Because we argue that grammar is key, because language is in absolutely everything we do. When you destabilize the center of what we do, it allows you to look.
More specifically, the plain text is a representation. It represents both law and it represents stable logos, which is what we are criticizing. That by crossing out, by placing it under erasure, we see both the present and absent aspects that allows us to best break down this ideology.
The order would be the alternative of the negative. Then it will be the links of the negative. Then it will be the impacts of the negative. Then the thesis framework of the negative. Then the alternative or the advocacy of the affirmative. The framework of the affirmative. The background page of the affirmative. And then the impacts of it. So, alternative of the negative, links page of the negative, impacts of the negative, thesis page of the negative, advocacy of the affirmative, background page, or framework of the affirmative, background page of the affirmative, impacts of the affirmative.
Be sure to signpost these. Some of these things are on the same page.
Okay. Everyone ready? The first argument is to be turn erasing violence of the system, that the system of the system that we must defend against makes this violence invisible, and indicating the method of direct confrontation for the individuals who are disciplined into the lowest caste, i.e. women who are in the caste system, or the victims of FARC rape and child abductions will never be able to see who they actually must defend themselves against, which ultimately makes a far more confusing method. But the next argument is going to be destabilize stabilizing grammar only makes the way in which the system operates more confusing, indicating that we will not be able to use a method of direct confrontation. We would say that ultimately the next argument is going to be turned to utilize ivory tower theories of the league, which are ultimately not going to be a viable method for individuals who are ultimately experiencing proximal violence in the media. We have ultimately massive solvency deficits to be their alternative, because we are citing a group of women that's gone from 5 women to literally 400,000 individuals that has been able to stop things like arranged marriages in India and been able to stop violence and rape from happening against women in the media. Those are one damn instance of erasing text or rearranging text ever doing jack for individuals who are actually experiencing violence in the media. The fourth argument is going to be turned to make violence inevitable against the colonized body, because it means that individuals cannot use direct confrontation when they are literally about to be raped, when violence is happening against them in the media. These are the individuals, the women and children that are affected by the FARC movement, that will never be able to get out of the system that they're in. And ultimately, they are also not able to bring in a new ethic, a new endorsement, an understanding of the way that the methods of the groups that are on the bottom of this system are not the same methods that are used by the ivory tower elite, i.e. in the debate round. Ultimately, it should be a prioritization to be able to understand how to bring these methods to our life, ultimately to understand those narratives as well as our own. The next argument is they say they make it an education ban because we're able to understand the problem of stabilizing language, but we say, however, that the system should remain the way that it should be seen the way that it actually is. If the next argument is to be turned, you simply obfuscate the system so individuals can't see the way that it operates in order to coerce them and ultimately not change. You make it so that the laws that are ultimately going to be the same after this debate round are obfuscated and seen all jumbled up. So the next argument is to be turned. You pass the way that the system actually works because of this. Yes.
Also, the Gulabi method made the Red Brigade, which was an educational program for younger women, so our method proves that it created it.
The next argument is going to be that this solvency deficit alternative. The Gulabi game inspired the Red Brigade, which is another group in India which is sought to educate the women in Uttar Pradesh province, has thousands of members and all to teach things like self-defense, martial arts. Additionally, the group arguments about racial avoiding hierarchies implicit pressed by all the dispatches to this argument, and additionally, racial ultimately creates the worst hierarchies because it means that you're ultimately just coming from an ivory tower perspective. Additionally, they say creates balance no warrant to this argument. The next argument is me turning to create an imbalance because it is impossible to understand the way that the language is operating, the way that it will actually operate, and where we'll have to strong cross play Jonathan's framework arguments about how that language is ultimately going to have largest magnitude impact. Also, they say they explode the playfulness and rigid structure. We don't think that this game that the systematic violence against bodies that literally disciplines them into being invisible by the law. Our method is beating the law, not rearranging it so it can just become the same again. Do masses erase text? Do the mass people erase text and rearrange language to solve the media violence against them? I don't think so. On arguments? They say that we see up, but we don't delineate how we use imagination. I think Jonathan gives you a pretty good explanation of this when you ask the POI. Our use of fiat is to allow the state to operate how it actually would within the resolution. The words don't leave the round. But it allows us to understand the way that the oppressivity of the resolution, the way that these individuals, 90% of them have rented media or amnesty already, in a way that allows us to be able to understand how we change these things. But additionally, the next argument is terms. We create the best type of imagination because we bring the visibility of the most oppressed and exposed groups who ultimately you're only working within the system and making it inevitable. But additionally, the next argument is you say that we commodify via the logos of philosophical tradition of the West. First argument is to only use the philosophical tradition of the West because you are citing authors like freaking Heidegger and elite Europeans that are never going to be able to understand the way that the body is disciplined and the flesh is disciplined in places where the law refuses to protect people. This is our argument. The law refuses to protect people. Ultimately, they can solve these things. The next argument is you mask the way that the individuals, you mask the way that the law actually operates by simply obfuscating and turning up. Additionally, the next argument is to be turned. You ultimately push and relegate the narrative of the individuals who are on the bottom to the periphery because we're not able to understand the methods that they actually operate with, and you're just appropriating their voices to this method of the Western philosophical tradition, ultimately being your words. Additionally, that's why they make the periphery worse. on their impact cases, they're not going to be able to win it internally to their impacts. Ultimately, they'll group other arguments about how the law justifies military and police violence. Ultimately, that's immediate violence against the body. Ultimately, only a direct confrontation will be able to resolve these things. Can we to the antebellum South as a reason why? Ultimately, slaves were not able to jumble up language in the text of law. They didn't have the law in their hands. The women in India aren't able to be able to get the law because when they go to the police simply whoop their ass, so they have to and won't prosecute Jack. But additionally, yeah, you make violence enough. Next is on affirmative solvency. They concede the entirety of affirmative solvency. I want you to extend across specifically, we have empirical evidence, specifically about how it started with five women in 2006, went to 400,000 members, has empirically been able to stop the systemic and political violence that we've been able to talk about, ultimately rearranging and creating a change with a hierarchy operate. Gulag Gang has ultimately gotten 21 members into the local legislature via the fear that the police actually have. Just I want you to extend across all the arguments about the way that the symbolic endorsement is uniquely important because debate is a unique space to be able to understand the methods of individuals that are normative hierarchies relegate to the bottom to be fully disciplined as non-human. They ultimately meaning that there's a debate is a key space to be able to understand the state. They say that fiat is ultimately bad because this thing is violent and that we fiat because we use the plain text. However, they concede Jonathan's arguments about why this is uniquely important, about why we cannot obfuscate the way that the state normally operates. We cannot obfuscate the violence of the resolution by refusing to fiat. We fiat the resolution, which is ultimately happening in the status quo, meaning that we have only created more awareness for this. And ultimately, they say that we have bad epistemology. No more is why we have bad epistemology. I want you to extend the framework argument specifically that 90% of policies ultimately have benefit only 10% of individuals, and that no styles called social engineering, ultimately why we cannot do this, and they say that on our interpretation that we do not specify an ethic. However, we just say that you should vote for the team with best ethic ultimately, and we say that you should prioritize individuals who are the worst type of system. Extend across the entirety of the background page, and the entirety of the links page goes on response to all they say is turn. The FARC is going to be able to get away with rape in the status quo, but they concede that the plan never actually happens, but it's the only way that we're able to actually focus on and create an understanding of how it works in status quo. They concede the entirety of the impacts. They ultimately mean that genocide and all the violence that they discuss will be inevitable, ultimately cyclical in a world in which we do not spotlight the way that violence happens at the bottom, to the bottom.
Take less.
Yep. Alright, so are you fiating your plan or no? Like, which one is it?
Yeah, we are fiating our plan.
Okay.
So we do fiat. What we're saying is that we have to fiat, let it be, so that way we can actually have.
Okay, so you're saying, let it be, all of these crimes are going to go unanswered for.
What do you think happens when you fiat a plan in this debate round?
Yeah, okay, so all the crimes are going to go unanswered for. Unanswered for.
No, that's the point about fiat is illusory arguments, right? That we have to.
But if fiat is illusory, but you're using fiat, you are admitting that you're using fiat.
Okay, the way you understand fiat doesn't have to be how we understand it.
Okay, well then, can you explain it?
Yeah, fiat of course is illusory. Every debater in this community knows, even if you do a straight up case, that it's illusory. What we're saying is that in order for you to have direct confrontation, you have to know who exactly the enemy is. And that is the point of creating
So make the
plain
problem
text.
worse to cause rebellion.
No, it is not. It is what the lobby does. They know exactly who their enemy is, and so they confront them directly. The point of the plan text is to make clear what the enemy is.
The order is going to be the alternative and the alternative solvency.
Can you say that again?
The alternative and alternative solvency.
Yeah.
And then the links. And the impact means the same.
Alright.
Like,
He'll signpost.
that's
If
fine.
he doesn't, I'll care.
So on the affirmative, you're doing the solvency.
I mean, the only real change is that I'm going to be putting framework at the bottom of the criticism.
Both frameworks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have both frameworks on the sheet of paper, so I will make sure to signpost when I'm going through these arguments.
Okay, this side goes.
Yeah.
I will make sure you do that. I have no doubt in this game. Good. Everybody ready? The MG fundamentally misunderstands the argumentation we are going for. Our argument is that the way that the problem that oppression is created is through the mechanism of stability within the law, that stability within logos. That the only understanding that's currently happening, not only just within the world, but also the way that the affirmative justifies it through a mechanism, is a mechanism by which you have to have a stable, you have to act with the law in order to create any change. Thus, the argumentation we are going for is the way that you break down this to be able to create new ethics, to be able to best and engage not only within the resolution, but also engage with our own individual activisms and mechanisms through which we destabilize this by doing things like such as the trace, by showing the differences between the present and the absent aspects, by showing that the Senate by changing this and allowing for the best engagement or best able to solve. Thus, a lot of the arguments that the MG is going for about how we just jumble up words doesn't work. We will explain this more on links. However, looking to the alternative itself. FARC argument makes the turn that we are only allowing for violence to continue within the system, which leads to indivisibility. It's not the argumentation that we're going for. We say that by crossing it out on your flow, you still see the present aspects that of the plaintext that's happening, but you're saying this is insufficient, that this is the problem is the stability that you try to create. This is exactly the argumentation you are going for in a lot of your advocacy. You were saying that women do and cannot engage within the stable system, thus they work outside. But this is exactly your argumentation that thus the only way that you act is mechanism says that the law has to act first before individuals can act with themselves. Thus, the only way that you only recreate the same form of invisibility, which means the only alternative, the only mechanism through which we can actually solve back what the harms that you were talking about. Additionally, that argument makes that by destabilizing it makes the system more confusing. This is not the argumentation we are going for. We say that we need to break down the system that is creating the system. The system in itself is confusing. The system itself creates all these laws, and the laws tries to stabilize them and justify themselves. The only thing that creates the harms of their own oppression. Allow for these laws such as the Polish state or past laws that allow for right to continuous education. Why the only alternative to break down the setting, break down the understanding they isolate. Next argument makes that the idea is that we will engage in the average tower. The response here is that this is not an average tower. We're not just appealing to flock here. We're saying that we need to engage with the masses by engaging with individuals and outside of a legal system that says that you can only engage and you understand this and you can only engage with us because we are the absolute center of truth and education. Why we are rejecting this form of ideology. Addition second is that erasure best engaged by this by utilizing the ethic of the masses, by that erasure breaking down such thing, break down the mechanism by which the law expresses itself to education over how we are better able to reject these forms of violence that allow the government to say, oh, you little people down here don't matter, and that we are the better resolve that. But additionally, third is that this problem, the argument doesn't even matter because the fact that this is a debate about ethics. We win argumentation about why right now blood systems would be preferable as an indication why you will vote for the negative. The next argument makes that is that you can't use direct confrontation under our argument. This is another indication about how the MG doesn't understand the argument we are going for. That we are saying that the best confrontation happens through a mechanism in which you try to break down the textual stability. We try to break down these centers of truth, such as laws. The indication about how we better allow for confrontation, not only in this issue but on all issues. In addition, the next argument makes that the next argument makes that the system has to be seen on how it is. We are showing how the system is. You can go to our third solvency argument, the number B, that says that the problem is not the issues of present aspect of absent, but rather the fact that we need to have a balance that shows trace the way that things have interacted, the way that these things show. Our textual ratio is the only way to actually spotlight these issues in order to be able to break them down. The next argument makes that individuals can't see how the system operates. This is probably just another link with criticism by saying that you are assuming that individuals don't understand and can't engage with this. But additionally, we are better able to break this down by allowing individuals to see the problems that are inherent within the system and deal with things in their own way, be able to break down the web mechanisms to say that you are perfect, to say that you can only work through one mechanism means that we are the means that are turning better results. Next argument makes the turn on masses. We've already answered this bill that says that we actually engage with the masses in order to be able to resolve back the harm to the affirmative case and for the alternative for the critique. Means that we are able to resolve this. Next argument is the solvency deficit argument about the retrograde. I don't even really understand this argument, but it appears to just be another cross application of the affirmative case. We said that you are still being entrenched in these ideologies and say that the only mechanism through which an individual can act is the way in which you work through these same systems. We say that you have to be able to break those and break down those understandings before you can be able to create the change that you want to see in the world. The next argument makes that erasure only recreates the same worst hierarchies. We've already answered this, that the problem is that the hierarchies are entrenched in the status quo and that we need to be able to break them down by showing the way that they are insufficient and try to destabilize them. The next argument you make is about how
We created an imbalance.
About how we create an imbalance because we can't ignore people in the system? No, we are showing by having both textual stability there and by crossing down, by showing the problems that are inherent with it. We are able to create the balance, be able to show the ways in which these things progress, and to show the historical behind the next argument makes that we shouldn't be. That we shouldn't be playful on these issues. It's not the argument. The argument is that structures are rigid. We need to show we need to make them malleable. We need to break them down and show that and show the different ways in which we can interact with them as an indication of why the alternative is best. Thanks. The first argument that we use is that their utilization of fiat to have the state act only shows the oppressiveness of the resolution. The first argument is that this only shows the problems that is inherent within your methodology. That you assume the only mechanism through which we can create social change is through the state, through the social laws. The indication of why you only reinforce the same harms and ideology that you even attempt to create. The second argument is that you only allow for the oppression to continue. You say the state has to exist so that we can confront it. You justify the existence of the state through these mechanisms, even though the state is causing oppression, is an indication of how you only allow this oppression to continue. The next argument is that we are only working within the system means the violence becomes inevitable. We've already responded to this by showing that we break down the system and make it more valuable. It's an indication of why we were able to resolve its harms. The next argument makes the turn that we use the same philosophical traditions of the West. We've already responded to this above. It says we are utilizing the ethics of the mass. It's an indication of why we are very able to resolve this. And now I'm repeating myself here, but the MG only recross applies a lot of the same arguments. However, the next argument they make is that
We use Western philosophers.
no. Oh, they said we regulate the narratives of individuals to the periphery. This is not our argumentation. Instead, the state tries to create the center and periphery that we exclude individuals to the periphery because they are not the normalized structure. Say that we're better able to break this down by showing that the center is imperfect. We invert these ideas of perfection and that is mechanized through the law. But we say that we are appropriating voices. However, you are probably doing this just as worse, just worse by trying to utilize the same movements through your own activism. This round is an indication of why you probably linking to this worse. The next argument on the impacts. They say that there is immediate violence that is happening and that only confrontation solves. However, the first argument is that confrontation against the stable system fails. If the system becomes is so entrenched and so rich, especially to the point in which even yourself view it as a center of truth that you look to in order to enact your plan text. It's an indication of why your confrontation doesn't work only by breaking down these systems. We're better able to resolve or the harms and oppression that are happening within these systems. It's an indication of how the purpose is better able to resolve or the harm that you're talking about means that you can stay across the impacts that we talk about here, but Chris is going to talk about that more in the yellow part. On the framework, I have this all just together, but the only arguments we actually need here, because we're both going to epistemology arguments, we both function within these frameworks, but the only thing that matters at the end of the day is the ethics of this argumentation. Is an indication of why when we are winning the argumentation about why a ratio is better, able to begin to engage within the ethics of the masses, is an indication of why we're better able to resolve its harms.
So, it's largely going to be the same order, and we're just going to wrap this thingy up. Alright, we're going to go here. Absent of perm, they're seeing a lot of offense on this critique, which means that the ability to break down the root cause of the oppression that they are talking about is always going to be a reason to vote neg. Coupled with the fact that they admit that their act doesn't solve anything means that you are only going to be looking to this. We say that their epistemology is bad because they can only function through the structure of law. They never answer this back. They admit that they use fiat. One of the ways that they're probably going to try to get out of this is some weird interpretation of fiat that has been bouncing around and making absolutely no sense in this debate. You should shut the door on that one. Do not allow them to come up here and re-explain some wonky interpretation of fiat that's going to give them access to any offense because they haven't explained it this far and they shouldn't get access to it in the future. They admit influx and they admit several different times that they are using fiat, which means that they are a direct link into the K and they never answer this back. Going on to the solvency. They read a lot of turns. Some of these aren't even turns, but a lot of these don't interact whatsoever because they fundamentally misunderstand what we are saying. On the erasing term, which is probably what they're going to try to go with, we never try to make the violence invisible. The point is that you cross it out. You do not erase it with your eraser because you need to see that the presence is there. You can still visualize the struggles of the past, but realize the change in the future, which is the entire premise here.
Well, that makes sense. You can't really fix it.
The point is that you will still see it. That is what they did with the Constitution. That way they could still see the struggles and the mistakes they made in the past. That way they could make changes in the future. That is the entire point. Additionally, they never actually interact with our alternative solvency, saying that breaking down the idea of logos and the idea of linear thought is going to allow us to engage in other forms of thinking that will allow the confrontation, allow the overthrow that they are talking about. The only way to fix what is happening is to fix the system, not by doing absolutely nothing and granting people who have raped people amnesty, but by actually breaking down the way we think about it and allowing people to work outside the system to break down the system. They never answer these arguments. Additionally, they might try to go for the ivory tower, but they never explain to you, one, how we are an ivory tower, so you're not going to allow them to explain that later. And additionally, you can see that we are engaging with the masses and allowing the masses to work outside of the system that we all admit is oppressive. The only way to break down the system that is oppressing us is through the changing of our mindset. They never engage with this argument, which means that they never engage with the fundamental question of decay, and they're not going to be getting access to this. Additionally, they might try to go with the confusing arguments, but that is not the point. The idea, okay, first off, you're going to be extending that the system is already confusing and that the system already disincentivizes minorities. They admit this themselves when they say that policies are being passed for the elite and not helping minorities. Means that system is already confusing, is already not being utilized by minorities, so there's absolutely no reason why they're going to be getting access to this, because the system is already confusing, which means that there is no reason for this. They seriously drop out solvency. All of their terms do not interact. Extended Corey's arguments don't allow them to flush out in the PMR any more than they did in the MG, because a lot of these arguments do not have uniqueness and do not actually link to decay. They do not show you why these terms actually work. You shouldn't allow them new links in the PMR. Going on to the links. Once again, extend across that they use fiat, which means that this is always going to be a problem. With a stable state, there's no ability to resolve the oppression that they're talking about. The only way to destabilize the state is to use this. Additionally, going on to the, yeah?
They're going to go for that violence is happening and we should solve it. However, it's only entrenched because of these stable systems.
Yeah, they're going to go for violence is happening and we should solve it, but it's only entrenched because of these stable systems. Additionally, when their plan does absolutely nothing, they have no ability to solve it, and you're not going to, don't grant them new arguments on solvency in the PMR. Going on to the violence. The only way to, they can see that the only way to break this down is through the alternative. There is no way to break it down by using a plan text that just grants amnesty to rapists and murderers. That is not going to be able to stop the violence that is happening. You are going to be extending this across as the only impact that has actually been extended in this debate.
Flex.
Yeah. Is it flex or flex? Not flex.
Okay, so the order is going to be a short overview, and then the negative solvency. Sorry, I didn't mean to say negative, the affirmative solvency. And then the negative all solvency. And we are going to go to the negative links, the affirmative background, and then we are going to do the negative and affirmative impacts, and then the question framework.
Representations of our methods is the framework for the judge. Therefore, this debate round is only a question of methods. You're going to be voting for the affirmative Pacific BH because, under the realm of probability. Under the realm of probability, because we have an actual method that has been proven to work in the real world to grant systems of liberty for those in the darkest, deepest places of the earth who are not granted space to work within the system. Which is why we have a direct confrontation to the system that has proven to work for 400,000 women so far in new educational systems and has proven to stop police abuses around the world and stop rape and actually give women access to new education. Yep.
Sorry, this is going to be a little ways up. But the argument that methodology is the only thing that's being weighed in this round is completely new framework.
I mean, it's just an extension of, like, on our framework that methods matter. I mean, I'm not saying that epistemology doesn't matter, it's just an extension of one of the things that both, no one's ever doubted that. I'm confused.
It's in the framework.
It's in the framework.
Under consideration.
Yeah. Okay, which is why you're going to be voting for us in terms of probability on our solvency. They cold concede our solvency. I want you to go ahead and extend the number 3 that this is the first step to liberty for those in the lowest rungs of the caste system on earth who have no access to the system, who are not in the system because they are not given any representation by the law. That is why the affirmative directly confronts the law, directly confronts the system. The negative loses because they came out with the K that they did in the prep time and just assumed we were going to be part of the system. We have a direct confrontation against the system. We use the same method as Gulabi when the police did not represent them, when the laws did not represent the Gulabi women, when their bodies were being colonized, they used direct confrontation, which is why we fiated the plan text, because it brings it into reality, the reality that the police don't pay attention, the reality that the plan text is bad representation, the reality that the methods and representations that the plan text creates in the debate space makes it unsafe for debaters, because we start propagating the methods and the ethics embedded in that resolution. So we take the method of the Gulabi gang, and that is we have direct confrontation, and that has proven solvency. You can see that that is the first access to liberty for those who have no access to the system. On the negative solvency, I want you to go ahead and extend the ivory tower argument that they're always going to be embedded within the Western philosophy. That is the prerequisite to their method in the first place. They say there are no ivory tower. The Alawar literally says we did not specify a reason as to why they are embedded in Western philosophy. Your own links indict Western philosophy as a prerequisite to our orientations to the world and how that makes impact cyclical. Yet in your own solvency, your method is based off Heidegger and Western philosophers. Probably means that the framework that you use for your method is always contaminated with those who are always embedded in the system and always embedded within privilege. You can go ahead and extend from our framework how those who are embedded within privilege are always casting subhumans and non-humans, which makes the women who are always oppressed in northern India and the victims of the FARC always inevitable, which means the impacts of the affirmative cyclical genocide is always inevitable. The world of the negative. You say that you create absence, but I want you to go ahead and extend the fact that what Evan tells you where we are not working within the system, and it is key to make the system visible to us, so that way we can have direct confrontation. You conceded the number 1 on our solvency, that direct confrontation is key. That direct confrontation is impossible if we did not create the reality of the plan text in this room, like create the reality of the oppression and the rape that happens. You have to create that reality in order to have direct confrontation. You concede that we have full solvency against that oppression, which means, yeah.
Those who don't have access to the making law can't draw a line through it.
Yeah, and those who don't have access to the law can't draw a line through it. That is why you don't garner access to solving for those who are in the periphery and being violated by the court. Yeah.
Yeah, the argument that people who don't have access to the law don't have access to the critique is new.
No, that was Evans. On their impacts and negative, it's an extension. It says people in the Gulabi can't go to the laws and erase them at police stations. That was right after the antebellum argument, where also the slaves in antebellum didn't have access to erasing things and getting their liberty that way.
There's also a new argument that says we're entrenching working within the system in response to every question.
Yeah.
I do actually have that on my index page.
Which means that when we have direct confrontation, we are operating outside the system. That is what the negative is not getting. That we see it in front of ourselves and we take the bamboo stick and the pink sari and we directly confront it, which has full solvency, because you can see that on the affirmative solvency, which gives us full probability to solve the violence in the periphery. You are always embedded in the Western philosophy of privilege, people who came up with your method. That is why you are always obfuscating and creating the subhuman and the non-human, which makes the impacts inevitable. You also can see that we also create educational programs like your system, like your alternative tries to do. You say that
Saying the term that they erase the violence of the system creates some significance.
What is it?
That they erase the violence of the system.
Oh, also, I extend the fact that when they do the erasing method, that erases the system, which makes the violence inevitable and the violence silent, which is happening right now. Like with the FARC, how the president of Colombia is literally giving them amnesty for the sex slaves that they're doing. That is the same method that they are doing in the alternative of the negative that makes the violence always inevitable. Go to the links page. He says the affirmative beliefs we have to go through the state. That is not true. We merely represent and make the reality of the oppression that is happening in the status quo an actual thing within this room, so that way we can defend the representations of the lobby gang like they do. They make the reality that they can't go to the police stations, which is why they know they have to pick up the bamboo stick to actually confront it. Your links are extremely weak off the fact that we are just fiating it to be in this room so we can have direct confrontation. I also want you to go ahead and extend the fact that they're always pre-embedded within the Western philosophy on the background. You can see that this is exactly what's happening with FARC is happening with the lobby gang, which is why our method is absolutely essential for this resolution, the representations and on the impacts. You can see that the lobby and the slaves in the antebellum, those in the lower caste systems, would never be able to use your method to get grant liberty. They would have to always take the direct confrontation of the lobby gang to actually access solvency, which means the impacts of the affirmative are always cyclical, and the representations of epistemology are solved by the affirmative.
To resolve for me, I do end up voting Aff, but that's because I think that there are a couple of problems coming out of the negative strategy in terms of dealing with the affirmative. The first one is you have to get to case. Especially in a world where they are kind of running a critical affirmative, your instincts should always be to generate some level of offense. I agree that this affirmative is probably really wonky. In fact, I think it's really problematic and you should fundamentally probably restructure some of this stuff. I think that their explanation of fiat seems to me to be, by the end of this debate round, and seems to be out of the get-go too in terms of their framework arguments, that they are using fiat not as an endorsement of an action, but as a way to recognize what the state does. So they don't personally advocate for that. They also make a number of framework arguments that kind of go through the round that I think gives them some access, that essentially fiat, because it's not real, doesn't generate some of the negative implications that you're talking about. I think that argument is really sketchy. I think if you don't want to be topical, then don't be topical. Like I think this is incredibly dangerous in front of a critique team that is maybe a little bit more well-read in terms of that literature, because they're right in terms of calling you out for using the state. I just don't think you deal adequately with some of the framing arguments that get you access to some of the impacts underneath their arguments. But I think another team is going to be like, fuck you for saying that people who are oppressed can't figure out their enemy unless you use fiat. I'm pretty sure they know what their enemy is. It's probably a number of structural issues. Somebody is going to get very dangerous with some of those arguments someday. I would be very careful. I also think that there are a number of problems. I mean, in terms of a couple of responses, I do agree that it's not merely a question of methodologies in terms of some of their framing arguments, but they also talk about representations and methodologies. So I think they get access to some of those representational arguments, which becomes problematic in a couple of places in y'all's criticism. Let me see. Sorry, I have to take notes because they keep me organized. I think they're right that you are right that they must understand erasure. Erasure is not erasing, right? So I don't think you're getting access to some of these erasing arguments. Additionally, the MG does repeat himself quite a bit. That's something that you're going to want to watch yourself. I think you make the masking argument in 3 different places, and you also make some of these re-entrenchment or obfuscating the system arguments in a number of different places too. I think you need to spend more time on some of these impact arguments about why people who most need access to this type of alternative don't have it, right? I think the argument is not just some people can't draw through laws. I think the argument is the people we are talking about, particularly in places like India, don't have access to literacy. How the fuck do they access erasure at that point? I mean, I just think that y'all need to be going another level deeper in terms of the question of privilege in this debate. I do grant some risk that this is indeed an entrenchment of Western ideology, especially in a world where I do think there is a concession on the impact level page. You may have just not flowed that argument, but it does seem to function also on the alternative page. I think it needs to be considerably more fleshed out, but I do grant some risk there. It's just, this is also kind of frustrating because I also grant them the risk that you are using the state, which could possibly re-entrench it, but you have conceded solvency arguments that I think deal with that risk to some degree, whereas the solvency arguments on the alternative are very, like, there is a significant level of debate there, right? Which means that there's probably a better risk of answering the AF. They may not be specific, but the alt solvency arguments aren't very specific either, right? They're pretty broad. You talk about breaking down binaries. I don't know which binaries you're talking about. You talk about logocentrism, but I don't have a definition of what would be necessarily Western logic versus other forms of logic that might be utilized. Another thing that y'all might want to think about is this is still a very traditionally structured logocentric way of making an argument, right? It's not like they are radically reassessing the way we understand narrative or argument. You don't make those arguments, but if you see these arguments again, that's something to consider. I think that both teams just need to, I think, make maybe fewer arguments, but arguments that are better explicated and maybe matter a little bit more in terms of the context of the actual debate round. So in that instance, I vote on a risk that the AF solves, which I think is higher than a risk of the alternative solving for the impacts of the AF. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, you're good.
So do you think that there's not a way for us to do it to instill, read the resolution or like affirm the resolution?
I mean, I think you can, but I actually think it's way shadier to do what you're doing than to just be like openly, we're fucking you right now. You don't get access to this, you don't get access to this, now we can move forward and have the debate. I think that these arguments, if you want to make them, I think you kind of need to commit. You have all of these framing arguments about fiat being bad, policy making being bad, and then you still utilize it. I just think in a world, in a different debate round, another team is going to exploit that fairly effectively. But I think everybody in this round is like very good at debate. Like it's also, I think these are just like small mistakes, everybody's tired, that sort of make it very difficult to resolve. So that's kind of how I come down.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Like what parts would really stand out to you that need to be better explicated and like seem like unnecessary, and what parts seem unnecessary?
I think framing is fine. I think your role-playing arguments are, like, they're obviously not anything new, but I think they're good. I think the impacts could use terminalization. That's true on both sides of this debate. I just think it's honestly like the plan. It doesn't jive with your solvency arguments. I also don't understand, you guys should be making arguments in this debate in terms of why you are a direct conflict. I don't know what a direct conflict necessarily is or isn't out of the solvency. You talk about an example, but that doesn't indicate that they might not be an example of direct confrontation in that world either, right? So I think that your solvency and your plan text are really the issues here. It's also just sort of not that clear what you're criticizing. Like, you talk a lot about the Gulabi gang as a method of solvency and things like kind of micropol actions, and you have some criticism of the resolutions, but then you use that resolution. So you're not a criticism really just significantly, like you don't have a thesis that significantly addresses FARC, or you have like a couple of arguments there. So I think developing a clearer picture of what precisely you're indicting, besides just like this resolution in this or what have you, would also probably help jive a little bit more.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.